What is the transformation you are promising the client? And how valuable is that? So this is often what I see with businesses. They don't necessarily know what the value is they're delivering to the client and what the transformation is that they're actually promising the client. So they're pitching maybe benefits. They might even just be pitching features, but they're not pitching the outcome. What is the outcome? Where does the client go to ultimately? And that stuff is super, super important. He said, the heart of your business is value creation. He said value sits at the heart of what you do. And he said, if you think about it, a client will only do a business exchange with you if they perceive the value. If they don't perceive the value, they're not going to buy from you.
Hey, welcome to this week's episode of The Freedom Experience. I'm your host, Jean Moncrieff, and today I've got Garth Jemmett on the show. He's a specialist in helping businesses to create powerful, compelling value propositions. And this is a really big thing for me because I think this is the secret to getting your marketing and sales right. And companies that don't do this really struggle to articulate their value proposition and to find that product market fit. So in this episode, we spotlight three key things. Why your value proposition might be holding your sales team back and how to fix that. Then the secret to clearly articulating your business's value proposition so that your customers instantly kind of get it. And then finally, how to simplify your message and become the go-to-market expert in your niche, making sales a lot less frictionless and making your marketing a lot easier. So Garth's insights are going to transform the way that you communicate your value proposition to the world. And let's just jump in and have a listen to what Garth has to say. I think this was a great episode and really enjoyed speaking to him. Garth, welcome to the show. Fantastic to have you on. And I'm like really excited about today's session together. I think it's so important for business owners that they understand what a value proposition is and how it fits into the business and what they're doing. So welcome on the show and thanks for joining us.
John, thanks for having me and agreeing to talk about this stuff. I know you're quite passionate about it as well. And it's a real privilege for me to be able to share this with fellow business owners. It's something that I've stubbed my toe on in the dark on many occasions. And so I feel quite passionate about it. It's something I really like to help businesses get right. And it's something that you need to be able to understand the value that you offer. So it's something that I feel very strongly about.
So maybe on that, you've owned a business. You still own businesses, and you know how important this is for business owners. And we had a really interesting conversation about you getting somebody in to help you do your value proposition, because it's not something we need a bit of external help. So maybe take us on the journey you've gone through yourself and how you landed up. You've helped a few hundred business owners get their value proposition right now. How did you land up here?
So it's a great question. I think just to put things in perspective in my journey, I've been in business for just over 20 years, and I was originally an advertising guy. I was a creative in the ad industry, and decided to leave that and start my business, which is called We Explain Stuff. And long story short, what we did, much like the name says, is we explain stuff. So we were working with complex and technical or hard to articulate businesses, the banks, the asset managers, pharma, technology, consulting, anything where it was hard to articulate the value. And we were working with them for many, many years. Doing all kinds of stuff, funny enough, and I think that's often the case when you start your business. You see an opportunity, but then clients say, "Hey, can you do this? Hey, can you do this?" So things grow.
You go so far away from the bullseye, it just kind of expands and expands and expands, right?
It's crazy, and in a way, no one teaches you that stuff as an entrepreneur. You start very much, and you mentioned it earlier in the ebook. You start as an operator, so you're in there and you're doing stuff and you've got a skill and people are paying you for that skill. So we were we were literally doing everything from explaining strategies to explaining change management to explaining complex products and services and things, value propositions and things like that. And the interesting thing where the business hit a really interesting space was we were growing. So we got to about 28 people at one stage, which was for me was quite a big operation. And I had three account executive slash salespeople working with me. But the challenge for me was they could never do new business development. They could help a bit on existing accounts, but they couldn't actually sell what we did. Clients always wanted to meet me.
So this is the
And
owner operator founder kind of dilemma where you're just doing all
it
the
was,
sales all the time, and yeah,
yeah, and I can tell you hand on heart, sales meetings were very stressful and very frustrating. And the irony of that whole thing is this stuff was happening in the background, uh, all these kind of sales conversations, but um, we were on the radio for being an up and coming business. We're recognized by Nedbank. You know, we were on one of the TV shows, the Espresso TV show, as an up and coming business. So had a couple of speaking engagements. And so all of these things are happening. And on the surface, it sounds rosy. But
yeah.
behind the scenes, as the founder, you're meeting with your sales team and you're going, why the hell can these guys not actually sell this business? And I remember reading books on strategic selling. I looked at some Miller Hyman stuff, and reading all kinds of stuff around that. But never at any stage did I ever realize that the value proposition was actually baked into my head and it wasn't articulated in a simple way that my sales team could actually share with the client. So because we were a creative business or creative consultancy, we were selling our capabilities instead of selling our value.
Yeah.
And capabilities, if you think about that, think about capabilities as little pieces of kind of shards of crystal, and think about value as an actual cut diamond. You know, a pile of crystal is very different to a cut diamond, which has shape and form and structure.
Yeah.
And it sounds so silly and so simple, but I remember I actually was losing my marbles with the sales guys because they were bringing in okay deals, but I would come into a meeting and I would close like decent, like really decent work, but they just couldn't do it.
So
And I'd say to them,
you knew what the value was that you were selling, and you're very clear on that value, and it's locked in your head.
it was
Whereas the
intrinsic
sales
to the
folk
way I
are
spoke.
just,
Yeah,
yeah, are just kind of maybe
going through the
selling,
motions.
going through the motions, selling a bit of time or selling something, but they're not
Yeah.
looking at the customer and thinking, what is this? What's valuable for this customer? What are they? Yeah, and that is locked up in the owner's head.
100%. And I genuinely didn't know how to get it out. I
Okay.
read, I mean, I read the E-Myth. I read a whole lot of other books, even Value Builder,
Yeah.
Built to Sell, all these books. I read all of them. And to be honest with you, if you look at those books, they all talk to process and structure, but they don't talk to value articulation and value propositions. The only one I found was called the Value Proposition Canvas. But
Yeah.
even the Value Proposition Canvas doesn't teach you how to structure it into sales collateral that your team can use. It just gives you a high level framework, but not an actionable kind of something you can execute on and create an outcome from, like a pitch deck or like a one page value proposition. It doesn't teach you how to do any of that stuff. So it was quite profound actually, for me, that so many of these scaling up solutions spoke to process and structure, but not to value. They didn't ever
Yeah.
talk about value. And I read, there's a great book which is worthwhile reading by Josh Kaufman, and it's called The Personal MBA. And this is where it hit me really hard. He said, the heart of your business is value creation. He said, value sits at the heart of what you do. And he said, if you think about it, a client will only do a business exchange with you if they perceive the value. If they don't perceive the value, they're not going to buy from you. So he says the whole business should be built around being able to articulate that value and being able to scale that value. And
Yeah.
the trick happens with us as founders. Only we can articulate the value, and we end up doing stuff almost intrinsically, but we don't know how to pass that on to others in a way that is teachable. So we put together long-winded pitch decks and all kinds of things. And Harvard actually wrote a great article called The Expert's Curse, which talks very much into this founder space where you've got a founder who knows what they know, and they assume that others will understand it by speaking to them at the level that they speak at. So they're kind of in the weeds. But you've really got to be able to pull up and make your value crystal clear and simple. And the other key thing is visual. You really need to be able to visualize that value so that people look at it and they go, okay, that's really what it is. So for me, what I did is I had a fascinating conversation with a friend of mine in the UK who's been in sales for a very long time. A lovely guy, Chris Norton. He's probably about 65, about 65 now, ex-Dell,
Okay.
and he's been around the block. He's been in sales for a long time, and he said to me, he said, pick one thing and become known for that thing. So he said, the challenge you've got is, as an entrepreneur, you're always seeing opportunity. And he said, the problem with that is hard to scale. So you've got to
Yeah.
structure your value in a way that you can teach it to others. So he said to me, you're doing change management, you're doing sales enablement, where you're packaging complex products and services. You explaining strategies and things like that. And he said, dial into a space. And he said to me, sales is where the rubber hits the road. And he said, that is where the CEO or the founder needs stuff to happen. And he said, it's probably the hardest thing to get right is being able to articulate that value in a way that the sales team will get it. Because sales guys are not detailed guys. They don't want to get into the granular stuff. They want to be able to understand it really simply, be able to show it um, uh, on a page almost, so that it's one page simple. Um, and so that for me really set me on a trajectory where I started looking at, okay, so there's all these things out there around value, but how do you actually structure it in a way where you can extract it from a founder, but you can also package it into a scalable sales narrative that they can use for their team. And
Just going,
that was the journey that I went on.
yeah, just going back a little bit there. I think there was something that really important that you just spoke to, which is this idea of niching in, of dialing in, finding that unique thing. And I think there's a big fear that when we refine what we're doing, when we niche in, when we tighten up the lens, so to speak, that we're going to lose out on something.
Mm.
So many business owners and entrepreneurs are, I think the collateral that you talk about, the sales collateral, the presentations, we're following the competitors, or we're following the latest trend, and we're adjusting the material all the time based on what everybody else is doing, rather than trying to dial in the value proposition and find something that's really unique, and then create
Yeah.
all the messaging around that. And I don't know, I'm just curious, and the folks that you work with, I see it all the time. I don't that entrepreneurs are scared to let go of doing
Mm.
everything and trying to be unique.
Mm. It's it's a very, very, very good question. So the process that I take clients through, it's essentially 15 building blocks that are the questions that I ask, and it structures into 5 columns. But one of the building blocks is, how are you different, or how are you
Yeah.
unique? And most entrepreneurs get stumped there. They will go, okay, we're a cybersecurity business, and I go, okay, so how are you unique? And then they go quiet. They're not sure. But the reason that that's important is there's a positioning expert. I think she's Canadian, April Dunford.
Yeah. April
Fantastic.
Dunford, brilliant. Yeah.
She's really good. And what she says there is, she says you compete on approach. So clients have a problem. How is your approach different to competitors? And she said, what will end up happening is, if you get that right, you will find that there's a certain part of the market that sees real value in that. And that's where product market fit comes in. So you might see, okay, we do this really well. We approach this specific problem this way, and these types of people see it. But if you're trying to be all things to all men, you never get to that space where you can actually be really crisp around things. And the problem with that is, if you ever want to sell or be acquired one day or exit, it makes all of those difficult
Mm.
because it's not crisp. I mean, just on the weekend, I went for a drive, and I had quite a chuckle. I drove through Farnham, and there was a used car place on the side, and it just said electric car specialists. And I was like, that's just those 3 words. And then they had a whole bunch of Teslas, and a whole bunch of other electric cars outside. But just those 3 words, massive. Electric car specialists. Straight away, these guys do electric cars.
Yeah.
That's what they're good at. So I would say, depending on where you want to go with your business, if you want to scale sales and you want to create a narrative that your team can share, you need to be very careful of complexity. And I think the challenge we've got as entrepreneurs and as founders in general is, we're always seeing opportunity. We're always seeing new things, and we want to add those to the
Mm.
pile because we know we can make more cash out of them. But that's actually not the answer. The answer is to go, if I look at my books, where am I getting the most frictionless sales, where people are seeing the value that I add, and there's very little kind of quibbling going on about it, versus what am I doing that's really hard and frustrating? And it's the classic 80/20 principle.
Yeah.
um, but we're all guilty of it, every single one of us as founders. I don't We struggle to help ourselves, so um, the thing with niching and being specific is, you actually get incredible authority when you're in the room, because people know these guys are electric car specialists, or they are cybersecurity specialists for um, you know SME service based businesses in their first 3 to 5 years or 10 years or whatever. So yeah, that I would say it's there's fear around it, because you worry about your turnover. But if your message is dialed in and your sales collateral is dialed in, sales is a lot. There's a lot less friction around getting
Yeah.
deals.
I mean, that was one of the things I think that attracted to me to working with you. So for those who listening and don't know, we've worked together on a couple of projects, or a few projects so far. And you right from, we explain stuff very simple, exactly what's on the tin, to
Mhm.
you only focus on this, and you're not another
Yeah.
agency. So when I'm going into a client, and I know one of the first things I got to do is sort out that
Mhm.
value proposition. you're kind of in my black book, pick up the phone, get on a Garth, bring you in and start working on that. And you're, as you say, you're that specialist. You're unique. Your approach is unique, and you come in and you help that client that I'm working with to clearly kind of articulate their value proposition and then turn it into sales collateral. And I think one of the things I've struggled with in the past is where you work with generalist type agencies, it just doesn't work as well. That specialist is so valuable. And I think that's how, I mean, you've seen that with your own business, but as you said, when you walk into the room, you're the specialist, the person who knows value. You know, when I think about value proposition, I think about Garth. And I think that's where you kind of want to be in a business, regardless of whether you're cybersecurity or you're real estate or whatever it is. What's that niche that when you walk into the room, as you said, you're seen as the expert in that space. People are prepared to pay more and they value what you deliver.
Yeah, I think you're so right there, and there's the key with becoming really focused is, to your point, you start to see the problem very quickly. So I one of the first things I do when I engage with a client is I'll look at their website, I'll look at some of their sales collateral, and I'll see if stuff is landing. And one of the quickest ways to do that is, can the value be articulated on a page? Can you show some kind of story or some kind of visual or graphic or diagram, obviously with a value statement, that when a client looks at it, they go, okay, your value is clear. And the mistake I see a lot of the time is, especially in marketing agencies and advertising agencies, is they want to put a beautiful picture, they want to put some nice warm fuzzy copy on it, which is great, but that's not actually explaining the value or articulating the value. You need to be able to really show in its simplest formats. Like the framework that I use, it's called from to through. So
Okay.
you take it from here to here through this. And that's really it. It's that before and after. What is that? What are you actually delivering for somebody? Not what are you selling, what are you delivering? Like, what's the outcome that they get?
Yeah.
And it's what I really like about that approach, where you work with founders and you ideate and you draw that stuff out, is you can see in the meeting the lights are going on. People go, yeah, that's really great. I mean, I did a workshop. I'll never forget this. Just when COVID ended, I caught a train up to Reading, and I met two. It was a SME that was doing really well, and in the digital marketing space. Long story short, about 30 minutes into the ideation session, I see one of the head of sales kind of scowling at me over the table, and he's a kind of big bloke. I mean, he's a guy named Pete, lovely guy, fantastic guy, and he looks like a Viking. I mean, he's got this massive beard, and he's probably about 6'4", and he's a really big bloke. So I'm doing the ideation session, and I say, Peter, you're right. I'm thinking I've offended him or something, and he says, no, I'm peed off. So I said, with me? And I'm thinking, what have I done? And he said, no. He said, with myself. He said, we should have done this ages ago. He said, I'm sitting here. And he said, all you're doing is asking questions which are making me think. And he said, you're mapping things out. And he said, lights are going on all over the show. And he said, we've been fumbling around in the dark for so long, and what we just needed to do is because it's literally a 90-minute conversation, just to kind of get the ideation down, just have a 90-minute conversation, and I can already see the gaps. I can see the mistakes I've made. So that's very different. That's a very, very different approach to kind of just putting brochureware or whatever together. That's not really
Yeah.
getting down to the heart, the kind of the nugget of what the business is actually about. And again, just going back to sales guys don't want warm and fuzzy. They need to close deals. So they want to put stuff in front of a customer where the customer goes, okay, I get that. I really, this is a complex product or service, but I can see exactly why you guys are unique in your approach and the value that you add.
And just going back to what you were saying earlier, to create that picture in a person's mind, I think it may have been you who explained it this way. You sort of going from where you are now to where you want to get to is standing on a cliff, and sort of standing
Yeah.
on the cliff and creating the bridge from one side of the cliff to the other side of the cliff. And on the one side, it's sort of where I'm stuck, and on the other side is that outcome that you want to you want to be able to explain to your client at the
To
end of the
get
day, or to the customer, or whatever. It's like, how do we take somebody from here, cross that bridge to the outcome that they're looking for?
exactly. And I think what you've said there is so important. I mean, I'm working with another cybersecurity business at the moment that's got quite a number of complex products and services in their
Stable, so to
offering.
speak. Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing that we're doing is looking at where is the client at in all of this? What are they wanting? You know, not what are you offering? What is the client's world? What is their reality? What is their frustrations around
Yeah.
stuff? You know, like because at the end of the day, they've got a job they need to do. But what is holding them back from, as you say, crossing that chasm? You know, is it
Yeah.
complexity? Is it time that's being wasted? You know, like what is it? And that stuff is, it's really, really important from a value proposition point of view to know what your client is trying to achieve. That's the outcome space. Where are they trying to get to? Um, because I think all of us are guilty of that. We want to rush to solution, and that's why in terms of my framework, solution is last. I talk from two. Two is the outcome. It's where are you going, and then
Yeah.
the through, which is at the bottom, is the process you use, why you're different, etc. Um, people will get very interested in that stuff if they know that you understand where they want to go. If you dialed
So
into that,
if you die, yeah. I mean, so you could go and pick up the business model, Alex Osterwalder's business model canvas, and you could pick up April Dunford's work, and you could try and do this yourself. And I see so many businesses trying to do this themselves and sort of step through this. But I think very often what happens in those sessions is that they jump to trying to put the solution in instead of
yeah,
kind of thinking about how do we help our clients get from where they are now
yeah.
to that outcome. What's the process that you take clients through that makes this so different? And is it just that there's a sort of facilitator involved in yourself, or
Mm.
how is your process different? And I'm curious about that.
So the big mistake that, this is just in my humble opinion, people make is whenever they're putting a business together or they're wanting to launch a new product, they go and they build the collateral.
Yeah.
And so they put a pitch deck together, they'll put a
We
new
quickly need to
website.
create this stuff. Send it to marketing. Get
Exactly.
them to create something. Yeah.
And that is the biggest mistake. So what you've actually got to do, and to use your analogy earlier of the mountain, if you think about information like a pyramid, where at the top of the pyramid you've got the real tip, that's big picture. That's just a
Yeah.
high level summary. And at the bottom of the pyramid you've got the base. That's the wider kind of granular detail. The problem with a lot of us, and I include myself in this space, is we want to dive into the details, which is the base. But what you've actually got to do, so that's where the expert plays. Remember, I mentioned the expert's
Yeah.
curse earlier. The expert loves the base of the
That
pyramid because they
minutia, the detail at the bottom, the granularity that's lying at the bottom of the mountain.
granularity. But if you look at everyone, and this is everyone else, they're at the top. They want to be at the looking down. So if you can do an ideation session where you map out that big picture at the top first, you can go into the granular detail afterwards. Because one of the things that you do in that one pager is, so the session that I run, it's 90 minutes. There's 5 columns, and there are 15 questions that go, like 15 building blocks. Each of those building blocks talks to a specific thing. One of them is about outcome. The other one is about your business category that you function in. So what is your category that you're actually in? Another one is on benefits, and there's a whole bunch of others, but another one's on competitors. But the reason you're asking those questions is you trying to get those building blocks to be the base. It's not, sorry, not the base, the ingredients for that one pager. And once you've got that clear, you can then cascade down into the detail. So a sales guy, for example, can go, here's a one pager on our business. And if you want to know more detail on it, here is the interactive sales aid that works with it. So we create interactive sales aids, which think of it as a sales aid that navigates like a website. It's got buttons and stuff that you can move between things. But those building blocks are pretty fundamental. They are the essence of value creation. So, and what's nice about them is once you've answered them, the next phase in my process is to use the recipes. So I've got recipes or formulas or frameworks for building a pitch deck, building a webinar presentation, building a one pager, building an explainer video, etc. So I'll show you the order to use those blocks to actually create the best outcome. Because you're kind of basing it on first principles. You're going right back to the basics, and you're going, right, much like Lego blocks, let's see what we're going to build into this value proposition. And then once we've got that one pager right, it becomes the blueprint for everything else. So you use that almost as your golden standard in a way, or your cornerstone.
The cornerstone.
Everything.
In most cases, the kind of business owners, we're putting the cart before the horse, so to speak, where let's go and create a pitch deck, or let's create the sales collateral or whatever, but we're missing that one pager that is, here's how you get from here to here, and that's kind of the journey, or how you're going to cross from one side of the canyon to the other for the client, and then using that to assemble, and as you say, from Lego blocks to assemble all the other pieces. But we're fundamentally missing that kind of distilled down one pager, which is this is the value proposition of our business.
Totally. And at the end of the day, value creation, which, just going back to Josh Kaufman's book, like value creation is about transformation. What is the transformation you are promising the client, and how valuable is that? And so this is often what I see with businesses. They don't necessarily know what the value is they're delivering to the client, and what the transformation is that they're actually promising the client. So they're pitching maybe benefits. They might even just be pitching features, but they're not pitching the outcome. What is the outcome? Where does the client go to ultimately? And that stuff is super, super important to know. What I do, again, just a bit of a tip for the listeners, is ask your clients what they see as valuable in what you deliver. Because a lot of, you're not trying to do sort of woo-woo stuff here. You're really trying to get, from a psychological point of view, what is a driver for somebody working with you? What do they see that maybe you don't see? So they might say, Jean, you're very strategic, and you can land stuff. You get stuff fast. So there already you've got a bit of gold. that
to
makes
get
you
out there and
unique.
speak to your clients, have those conversations with the clients and try and understand where they see the value. So looking at your sort of top, there's probably a
Yeah,
percentage you'd go and look at, right? There's top clients that you take a look
yeah.
at.
So you wanna look at. I mean, as part of my exercise with clients, I ask them to ask at least 10, if they can, 10 to 15 ideal clients that they work with, and I say to them, don't make it a whole big spiel. Just say, hey, I'm busy working on my value proposition to refine it at the moment. Would you mind giving me two bits of information? The first one is, what is the biggest value I add to you, and why does that matter? So you're trying to, the why does it matter is important because you're trying to get the motivator behind that. And then the second one is, when you think of me, what one word or phrase comes to mind?
Love it. Yeah.
And it's so simple. And so guys will say, is that it? And I'm saying, yes, you don't want to overcomplicate it and over engineer it. And then what you do is you get that information back, and then you start to look for patterns, and you go, okay, this is very interesting. Look at what they're saying here. And these guys are all in this industry or this type of business. The power of that is, if it keeps coming back to that, you can extrapolate it out. So you can actually go, right, I serve these types of clients, and this is the value that I deliver. This is the transformation that I actually bring to them. And the interesting thing, founders are very shy of asking for feedback from their clients. They feel quite, especially if they're in the consulting space. But I remember another cyber client I worked with. He really pushed against it. He was like, I don't want to do this. And then I got a WhatsApp from him 2 days later with like a big beaming smile, and he said to me, look at what a client has said about the value we add. He said,
Yeah.
I had no idea. He said, I've actually got goosebumps just reading this. And I said to him, tell me that's not insightful.
Mm.
And he just said to me, thank you for pushing me. So, because you got to put yourself out there. It is a little bit intimidating saying to a client, hey, would you mind not recommending, would you mind just telling me what the value is I've actually delivered to you and why that matters? And then, as I mentioned, what one word or phrase comes to mind when you think of me?
When we
So
started this, I was just thinking on that point when we started, or before we hit the record button, we were talking about how many businesses find themselves stuck, kind of bumping against a plateau and finding it hard. They had some really good traction to start with, but getting to a point where they've lost momentum because the industry and the world changes around us. And one of the big kind of barriers to growth is not listening to, kind of being aware of what's going on in the market outside you. And I think just going back to what you're saying then, taking the time to speak to your customers and hear what's really important to them or what they value in you. And I think that can then inform where you need to take the business to find that momentum again. It's so important.
100%.
Yeah.
And again, just going to what you said when we first started talking before we push record. I think it was Larry Page, and I stand corrected, from Google. Someone asked him in an interview how he stays relevant, and he said, I get up every day and I ask myself, what's here today that wasn't here yesterday, and how does that impact my business? And what is so that's it's really, I'm a big advocate for simplicity. I love that exercise because it's simple. But the other thing, just around hitting a plateau, is sometimes you start a business and you hit a niche and you experience amazing growth, but then competitors get a whiff of it as well.
Yeah.
Or there's some new things that come into the industry, and suddenly you go from adding value, massive value, to being into a space that's quite commoditized. And it means that you've got to relook things again. Because I love you. You said it earlier. You should actually always be looking and tinkering, and it's exactly right. I mean, your value proposition is the tip of the spear of your entire business. So you can't have a blunt spear. You've got that spear tip has got to be sharp, which means you're always honing it, working on it, keeping an eye on it. Because I mean, I remember years ago, when we first started the business, we were doing a lot of explainer videos. We're like really, really early on, some of the earliest guys to do it. And the market got completely saturated. Everyone and their dog can
And now you've got AI and all that.
all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
So you've got to really watch that stuff, especially as a founder. You've got to be able to keep an eye on things and go.
But again, it comes back to what's your value proposition, getting that core kind of one page we were talking about right before you go off and just start creating explainer videos. And those, I mean, while there's more and more folks doing that at the moment, there's still, you're pouring money into it. You're pouring money into marketing collateral, and this fundamental building block is missing, that kind of anchors all of this. And is the difference, I think, is a huge difference in terms of your competitive advantage. If you don't get this right, you're kind of looking at what the competitors are doing and jumping all over the place all the time, as you were saying earlier, with the shiny object syndrome, instead of staying true to what you're really good at. And I feel like this is one of those strategic pictures, your value proposition, that you keep evolving. You've got to keep revisiting, take in the external market dynamics, listen to your customers, and keep evolving this picture over time. Totally. It's not something that's static, right?
No, and one of the things that I really like about that process, and incidentally, that process, I didn't arrive at that process like turn the lights on one day and was like, wow, this is no. I looked at a lot of the work I'd done for asset managers and banks and pharma, and I took some stuff out of that. But then what I started doing, and obviously books like Value Proposition Canvas and those, but what I started doing was working with founders like yourselves and asking questions. And then I was like, hey, that block's missing. Why? And then I would do more ideation sessions and go, hey, that's another block that's missing. Why does no one talk about that? So I would add that in. So gradually over time, I started adding them into this framework. But what I really like about it is, to your point, if you pivot into a new industry, the framework remains the same. You just re-ask those questions, and the recipes to create the sales collateral remain the same. So that's a constant. It's not changing because it's based on human behavior, psychology, how people are persuaded around what you're selling, things like that. Do they understand the value? So it's again, that's why I use the term first principles earlier. It's not a fad. It's a framework that helps you think and then helps you structure your sales narrative so that your team can go out there and sell. So you can just keep coming back to it. And as you're saying, both asking your clients questions, going, is this still true? Is this still true? Or are things changing?
Yeah, I think this is one of those fundamental things you've got to invest in. Otherwise, you're just spending a fortune on all sorts of stuff that ultimately is not going to give you the traction that you're looking for. So just going back to your process, what are you typically going to take folks through when you run the process? It's the ideation session first, and then where do we go from that?
So what you do is, first of all, you ask those questions, and I just do a mirror sticky note session. Each of those questions is color coded. Again, it's about 90 minutes. It's good if you bring in a diverse group who knows the business. So founder plus team, because they will always see things that the founder won't. And because you're visualizing it and you're mapping it out in a strategic session, and people can actually see it, they're not interpreting it just by speaking. They're actually seeing it. it allows you to get quite crisp on exactly what's being said. So then that is then shared post the session, and there's always light bulbs that go on and in the meeting, and then it's to say, is there any feedback on the session? So sometimes guys will share and they'll say, look, I thought about this after the session. Can we add this? All of that stuff then goes into, so I will then look at it with my team or myself, depending on capacity. And then what we'll do is we'll simplify. So we'll actually distill it into its essence. So my process is called understand, simplify, package. So it's understand the business, simplify it into its essence, so you can, and then package it. And the package part, that is where you're bringing in storytelling and visual thinking. The thing that a lot of technical businesses, and again, going back to that expert's curse, as complexity goes up, comprehension goes down. So the thing there, again, if you look at it, someone that's a salesperson, you want to give them simple. You want to give them, and it's not that they're stupid or anything like that. It's the fact that they want to be able to land that message as confidently as possible. And in order to do that, it needs to be simple. They need to be able to just talk about it really simply. And if they understand it visually and they can almost sketch it out on a board, the client will get it. And then the message in turn can be sold internally as well, because that's the other thing. Sometimes you've got multiple stakeholders involved in a sale. So we'll create the one pager, visualize it. And then from there, what we will then do is often ask a client to circulate that with a close group and say, is it resonating? Is it clear? Does everyone understand it? Tighten it. And then we move into the sales collateral. So we'll then take that, and as I mentioned earlier, that pyramid approach, where you now cascade down to the bottom of the pyramid, and now you get into more of the detail. So all you're doing in many regards is you're taking those fundamental building blocks and you're just going into more detail on them. So that's where you put a slide or a pitch deck together. And that can be generally for simpler businesses. We'll do probably between 8 and 12, maybe 15 slides. But for some of the very complex businesses, those decks can go up to 100 pages. Okay. So they can be quite granular. But it's also not, all of that stuff isn't shown at a granular level. You're seeing the big picture, and you can click through and see more as and when you need to. So it's all kind of hidden.
That's your ultimate, your sort of sales playbook that comes out at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And it's so important to get everybody. The key thing is alignment here, alignment around what our value proposition is, what our message is, and we're all singing from the same hymn sheet, so to speak.
100%. And it's again, it's one of the biggest reasons I make those sales aids interactive, where it's got a navigation bar along the bottom, like a website, is you don't want the founder to always have to be the guy doing the pitch. If you can create a sales aid that is like a talk track that a client because put it this way, sorry to jump sideways, the sales conversation is never linear. Client might go 2 slides in and go, okay, Jean, I get that. Show me this. Another client might want to go through everything. So you want to create it in a way where you can click on things really quickly and it takes you there. Again, it's just removing all of that friction, making things super simple.
If we go back to what you're saying right at the beginning, talking about yourself and your business, where everything was in your head, you got a whole sales team, but the real value proposition is kind of locked up in your head and you're having difficulty articulating it. When we talk about entrepreneurial freedom, this is a key step in finding that entrepreneurial freedom is, let's get it out of your head. Let's get that value proposition kind of clear, and then make sure we're using it to build the sales collateral, everything else that's got to be built, so the team can go out and do the work and you're not the bottleneck anymore. Right?
Totally. And I think, to your point, what I really like about what you've said there about entrepreneurial freedom is, if you have a way of doing something and we do an ideation session together, and we structure the narrative around that method or that approach, it no longer has to always be delivered by you, because you are teaching the Jean Moncrieff method,
Yeah.
for example. So that goes into your sales and it becomes part of your value proposition. So it sounds simple, but once you start doing that and you can prove it works, it becomes very, very powerful. So your team is able to sell around that approach. Again, going back to your approach to the problem, April Dunford. And because you've visualized it and you're showing clients how it works and what they're getting, confidence goes up, clarity goes up, and you can obviously close much more easily because they will look and go, hang on, these guys are not just showing me a bunch of bullet points on a presentation here. They're actually showing me a really structured, simple way to solve my problem. That makes me very comfortable. I want to work with them.
Yeah, love it. We're just talking about entrepreneurial freedom, and this podcast is the Freedom Experience. What does entrepreneurial freedom mean to you, Garth? Or freedom?
It's a great question. I think for me, freedom for me, I think the difficulty with this stuff is I spent so many years on the hamster wheel trying to get this darn stuff right, working long hours. For me, I think if I look at what it means for me, it means being able to work with people where they see the value. It's rewarding for me to be able to walk a bit of a journey with them and help them structure and package the stuff.
Yeah.
And then I think the flip side of that for me is family time. I think it's spending time with loved ones. So important, man, and looking after your health and things like that. I think a lot of us as entrepreneurs, I was listening to Daniel Priestley the other day. He said most of us work 11 hours a day. And I think that's true. I think a lot of us as founders work at least 10, 11 hours a day. So I think for me, I love this stuff. It's an absolute privilege to do it. And I think the kind of freedom side for me is being able to do that more and more, but where there's a balance of me spending time with my family and not being kind of shackled to the business, as they say.
Yeah. Love it. So, brilliant.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate the time and I'll put everything in the show notes, connection to you, all the tools we've spoken about and the fantastic books and all those good things. But I think the key thing is to actually bring somebody in like you to help them to work out their value proposition.
Thanks, Sean, and thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. It's great to have someone else that's as passionate about it.